What lies outside of Earth's magnetosphere is one of the defining hurdles humanity must overcome if we're able to leave this rock with any considerable success. The ionizing radiation put out by our sun will sterilize any surface as far as most of Earth's based life is concerned. If we are to leave Earth and again begin setting up shop on like the moon or even Mars someday, one of the major concerns and questions we will have to contend with is basically completely glaring. What do we do about this destructive energy? The reality is, for now, we have to have some sort of shielding in place, but even with the ISS where it is, which is technically still shielded by Earth's magnetic field, astronauts receive about 100 times the amount of radiation dosages that we receive daily here. Astronauts in the past have been said to see flashes of light when they close their eyes when they would go to sleep, as radioactive particles would actually strike their retinas, producing light. This major issue with radiation, as we are all aware, is something that is going to be a problem because of the genetic damage that can occur over time. Any number of genes can be broken, which typically will result in either cellular apoptosis or could cause many different forms of cancer to begin forming within the body. More so if the P51 gene is broken, which is the cancer suppression gene. So what is the solution? Well, more stout shielding could just be required, or the creation of a localized, powerful magnetic field around ships. But then, what happens when we get to a planet, say like Mars, that doesn't even have a magnetic field? Would we permanently be confined to just a few areas due to the surface being constantly drenched by radiation? With our current meat suit design, the answer is yes. But what if we could look to nature to solve a problem that is still caused by nature? Well, that's today's topic. In the events of Harbinger Down, a test in space in the 80s would be the last one the Soviet Union would ever engage in. As the pod crashes back down to Earth, their experiment to overcome the natural high levels of radiation in space would require a combination of two species. Predictably, however, it would go horribly wrong. So in today's episode, let's discuss the creature they chose, why it is naturally in real life almost unkillable, where it went wrong, and what it creates in today's episode over Harbinger Down. But as always, I want to thank you guys for watching. Without you, I am totally screwed. I hope everyone had a good Christmas or whatever you celebrate, or if you don't celebrate, I hope it was a good time either way. As we move into 2025, let's make it a good year. As always, Roanoke Tales and Roanoke Games are dropped in the description, along with my Roanoke merch. And also check out the Discord where we watch movies every month that then end up here. So, support the channel in any way that you feel that you want to or don't. It's up to you. So we kick off our story. It is June 25th, 1982, 15 years after the best car in existence was ever made, the 1967 Chevy Impala. I don't make the rules, I just work here. We are approaching the Arctic Circle with the re-entry pod absolutely lost in the sauce, going full-on interstellar. No way that astronaut would still be alive in there. Those G-forces would be blowing out blood vessels in their brain at this point, or all the blood's going to their feet and there's no blood left for their brain because it's currently in their feet. As it re-enters the atmosphere, pink goo begins oozing in. Well, that can't be good. It begins breaking up as the man's skin is also beginning to change. Looks like a massive allergic reaction, actually. Touching down, it's evident he crashed pretty bad, as he also appears to have become pink goo, but that's not actually right because he's not pink goo. We'll see that later. We jump over to Dutch Harbor, Alaska. It's, now, evidently, when the most dangerous catch is being filmed every minute of every day to be uploaded to Discovery Channel for years on end. A man and woman are loading the car as the dude complains about her not helping. Getting the vehicle started, they kind of forgot to clean off the windshield, good going, as then they head down the road. The guy is trying to drive the icy roads while also navigating. Brother, pick a struggle. Like, just hand over the map and focus on not killing everyone within the first 12 seconds of your adventure. It's Alaska, you've got a ways to go. Approaching Dutch Harbor, they then board the Time Bandit as they have slapped over the real name Harbinger. Hopefully it doesn't go down, as the title card says Harbinger Down. On the ship, the captain comes over the intercom, rallying all the men, telling them what's going on and who's doing what. We gotta haul up 20 tons of crab in this run, or we're gonna lose the ship. It's basically the same thing mechanics say in every TV show where it's like, we gotta get this car done or we're gonna lose the shop, except this time it's crab themed. And if you miss a single payment, they just torpedo your boat in the harbor. So a man walks in asking, what's a sister doing here on a crab boat in Alaska? His name is Doc, her name is Rennell. But don't get it wrong, he's not a doctor. They call him Doc because he lived under a dock. That is literally his backstory. Putting a fish on the table, Blondie then starts pulling a knife on another guy as the captain comes down telling her he will gut her if she pulls the knife on any of his crew. The woman in the corner from earlier, Sadie, introduces her friends. This is evidently her grandfather, Graf. She begins briefing everyone about the project. They are tracking a pod of beluga whales that have been tagged with trackers. The ice sheets are apparently affecting their migrations, and this is evidently due to climate change. So the captain says the ship will pretty much crab at night, and the scientists are going to work during the day. Bad weather is moving in though, which is going to make things difficult, as then they head to their room. Man, this looks like crap. But they do have a portable molecular analyzer. Okay, so if you put a sample in it, apparently it shows you what species it is, and if it has cancer. It does those two things. They're there to kind of check their biology, their words not mine, to see if it's being affected by climate change. I've never heard somebody getting their biology checked, but I'm just a former scientist myself. I don't know everything there is to know. Sadie now gets called to the wheelhouse by her grandfather. Heading inside, he asks if she's settled in. He says they have seawater in their veins, so that just sounds unhealthy. He continues on saying she should take the wheel. He tells her not to let her fear hold her down, as then she nopes out of there. And I guess she's just letting her fear hold her down today. Also, it will never be discussed why she's afraid of manning the helm. It's like vaguely mentioned, but it's never really confirmed why she's scared. Something like her dad would be proud. I have no clue why she won't steer the ship. As if almost ethereally, Mike Rowe's voice emits from the ether about how dangerous of a situation this is, crabbing that is, as the crew continues crabbing. Which, I'm pretty sure they were just filming these guys IRL crabbing. Thanks guys, I love crab. Crab is a totally goated edible animal. At some point, I'm gonna have to stop using slang from another generation, but this is what happens when you're chronically online. So Sadie goes to bed that night, checking on the beluga pod as they are right under them. Going to wake up Ronell, she doesn't get up. I mean, I get it. I would only science from about 4 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's a lie. After I had finished doing my work, I would continue to science from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. for YouTube. Checking Steven, he's also out cold, heading outside with her suitcase, which I'm guessing is the portable analyzer. Turns out I was wrong. It is not the portable analyzer. She puts on a pair of headphones before putting the camera under the water and into the ice. Seeing the belugas down there, they're just sort of vibing out, belugaing, as they do, as then she sees a flashing red light. Telling the captain, he says, well, that could just be like an old Navy buoy. Waking up the other scientists, these nerds finally wake up as they have broken through the ice and have brought up whatever the flashing light was. Sadie says the whales appeared to be attracted to it, as Doc suggests it might be a sea mine, but the light would be sort of a dead giveaway that it's not. I mean, typically you want to hide those things, right? You really don't want people knowing its location. Dropping it onto the deck, it immediately explodes, killing everyone all at once. Thanks for watching. So as they look at it, they realize the ice is blue, indicating it is very old. I would reckon, considering it's now, it's at least 42 years old. And it's only getting older by the day. If you watch this tomorrow, it's even older. So getting a light on it, something is there. Breaking through and grabbing the crappiest camera of all time and picking the worst camera angle imaginable, Steven then breaks into a montage about what is happening. He says the ice being rounded is caused by climate change, which I have no idea what he was trying to reference here, but breaking through the ice, finally, they see that it is human tech, but they aren't too sure of what it actually is. A control panel is clearly seen as one man says, some things should stay frozen, which you're gonna notice in this movie, because I'm gonna point it out to you, there's a lot of quotes from other movies that I think it's hilarious. Obviously, this is a callback to Pet Sematary, some things should stay dead. They then spot the astronaut as the captain says, is that an animal or something? Brother, it's an astronaut, except psych, it's actually a cosmonaut because it's from the USSR. Remember we had a good old-fashioned space race out of pure phallic measuring rather than holding hands and singing Kumbaya when it came to space? Look, I'm not saying it was a great time, but pride pushed us further into the space race, at least concerning humans, than we are in our current state, which was just basically us sending robots. I mean, I get it. Space is dangerous, but it seemed like we were more likely to take risks back in the day. Was that a good thing? Probably not, but did it yield results though? Yes. According to the salvage law though, with the Soviet Union no longer being around anymore, it's officially theirs. They could always return it for a fee back to Russia if Russia even wanted it in the first place, and oh boy, turns out, yes they do want it back. The captain then says they're just gonna put it in the hull and nobody's going to touch it until they are back in the harbor. The scientists are mad over this as they want to poke it with a stick, which I mean, I get it. I'd want to be doing the same thing. So they lower it into the hull for safekeeping at the behest of the captain. Back in the captain's nest, the storm is getting worse. They're now having to break through ice, which, if you want to hear a story about that going horrifically wrong, where 251 men lost their lives in one night, I have a video over on Roanoke Tales. Go watch it. No, for real. I was gone for like 4 months on that channel, but in 2025, it is the year of Roanoke Tales. Anyhow, as the man then heads back into the hole to ice the crabs, they check out the pod and it's still leaking. Scaring Doc as then he sits next to the pod. I totally thought he was gonna get grabbed by something, but instead he just kind of sits there and nothing happens. Not sure if you'd call that restraint on the director's part or just a missed opportunity. The captain then calls back over to Dutch Harbor. They aren't really interested in what he's saying as long as it isn't a mayday. The captain then goes full on time bandit. Also, have you ever looked at what happened to the captains on that show? I just did to kind of fact check myself, and good lord, you are not long for this world if you are a crab captain, it seems. So Sadie then runs into the others who want to discuss what they should do with their findings. Steven says it's not Grandpa's authority to basically tell them what to do with the spacecraft, as a man then comes in asking why the scientists are not down there sciencing. No, he's got a good point. Steven then gets his panties in a wad over that and starts making fun of it, which, as a former scientist, bro, I would be sciencing. I scienced in the labs. I actively heard other scientists call it that. He, she, it, scienced, are currently sciencing and will science in the future. I don't know what this nerd is talking about. So the big man, known as Big G, comes up to Steven talking about how he gets made fun of for his size because he is a big man. This piques Steven's interest. Even though he's not a psychologist, he says he can help. And this is actually a prevalent issue. People become so hyper-focused in one area and being the authority, they begin to think that they are qualified in other areas. I typically like to avoid that on this channel by telling you this is all speculative. Much like a lawyer, this is not financial nor biological advice for what you should do. As they head down, Knife Woman is Russian, so she says she can somewhat read Russian, which is sort of hilarious because that's a total lie. Pulling back some ice, she says the ship was a moonlander. This would put it way out of line with when they abandoned their moon missions back in the 70s. Because famously, the Soviet Union was 100% telling the US everything that they were doing at all times. Pulling the cosmonaut's helmet off, oh, that's gonna smell gross. Also, you're exposing yourself to God knows what. In fact, that whole pod should be wrapped in airtight plastic, if it is at all possible, because you have no idea what they were working on. For all you know, it could be biological or radioactive, and they wanted to see what a new type of suit could withstand. Really bad idea, opening that up and possibly releasing just radioactive dust everywhere. That said, the bro is frozen. He didn't burn to death either, which is a bit odd, and his veins in his neck are bulging, which we will talk about that momentarily. Steven continues talking to the big man about the things he needs to do to help himself. Breaking into the suit, again, bad idea. You have no idea what's going on with that, and I would immediately think biohazard. Pulling back the suit, there's a crisscrossing of veins that can be seen. Literally cutting him open. Brother, what are you doing? They take a sample from him and then bring him to the bioanalyzer. Knifey McKnifester then says, one of the words translates to water bear, or as they are known, tardigrades. So here we see there is several things to talk about. This is not like my Christmas episode where there was nothing to discuss, so let's get into it. First, the skin is still intact, but is incredibly pale. Interestingly, the veins that are crisscrossing within the body seem to me to be vasodilation ramped up into the extremes, and this would denote a critical drop in blood pressure likely accompanying it. When you have an allergy to something, the mass release of histamines actually triggered blood vessels to expand, allowing for redness, swelling, and itching, also spreading pretty far. The point is, your body is trying to get as many immune cells into that area as possible to deal with the perceived problem. The main issue arises when it basically takes place all over your body at once, and this is known as anaphylaxis. When the mast cells release the histamine and other inflammatory mediators, this leads to virtually every blood vessel in your body to dilate, and when this happens, as mentioned, blood pressure drops and will eventually reach a critical point, which is known as shock. Basically, our heart cannot keep up with the inflowing blood being as low as it is, and then the output not really entering a pressurized system at this point. It should also be noted vascular permeability increases, which can actually lead to fluid leaking out of the blood vessels, which in turn causes blood pressure to plummet even further. So, judging by this man's chest and neck, this was a lethal issue that he would have run into. Now the problem is, what was he exposed to that would have caused this? It's clear given the information that we have found out, tardigrades were in the pod with him. But what are tardigrades and why are they important? Water bears are a highly interesting species due to their sheer durability. Tardigrades are said to have originated from an ancient form of worm known as a lobopodian. These worms existed in the Cambrian era when the ocean was becoming extremely hostile. Predators were beginning to form and most animals actually didn't have any defenses at this point, and this led to an evolutionary arms race around this time. The lobopodians would continue evolving, becoming less segmented and forming these short, stubby limbs. The tardigrade officially came into being, but them looking the way that they do is not the main point of interest. It's just their sheer ability to survive pretty much just anywhere that's dangerous. This species can survive absolutely lethal environments to all other forms of life, existing in boiling water, freezing temperatures, high radiation environments, and even the vacuum of space. They almost seem like they never really formed on Earth to begin with, but they very much so did. Sometimes in nature, traits will actually evolve that seemingly make them overbuilt for a specific place. I mean, look at humanity. Technically speaking, we could have ended up with just smart enough for our environment, but we never really would have reached the point that we are now, but for some reason we are just ridiculously intelligent.
I don't know, man.
The tardigrade is like this, except in the direction of being overbuilt durability. The reason for this overbuilt body is a unique adaptation that makes them virtually indestructible. The thing to remember about life is that water typically is the solution as well as the problem. Take bacteria for instance. If it dries out, freezes, or get too hot, it will die. But if it creates an endospore, this highly resistant dormant structure basically shrinks its cytoplasm and with it decreases the water in its body, which allows it to survive for hundreds of thousands of years, as we have found out. Frogs that freeze during the winter do the same thing by increasing the amount of glucose in their cells to supersaturated levels, allowing them to fundamentally freeze and then come back to life once they warm up. Displacing water is critical to surviving in extreme environments, it appears, and tardigrades are no exception. But before discussing this mechanism, we need to see what happens to a human when exposed to this organism. So as the crewmates keep drinking, they can't hold their character any longer, as Steven gets upset and then hides in the doorway when he sees two women arrive. Pretty standard for Steven, actually. Following them, Xena Onatopp talks about Big G-Man, as he's known, and continues following, listening in, as Sadie then tells side male protagonist he looks like he died yesterday. She's putting the sample in the bioanalyzer, and Onatopp says a Russian woman can outdrink any man. She then says she can see Alaska from her house. Russian Palin, is that you? Also, I'm not sure where this information came from, but as far as I know, Russian women have livers like everyone else, so out drinking a man? I don't know, I've drunk with Russian women before. It's not that big of a deal. They're pretty easy to outdrink, so I'm gonna need the sauce on that one. Also, oh, Roanoke bragging about drinking, cool guy. You shouldn't drink, it's bad for you. I was drinking water. So looking at pictures of tardigrades, they then wonder what the Russians were even trying to accomplish. Well, luckily old Papa Roanoke is here to tell you. I lied about waiting till the effects. We need to talk about this now. The experiment likely followed a very important pathway, which is quite understandable given the fact that if we are able to accomplish the same thing, we would not really need any shielding on our ships, and this would give us a chance at leaving the solar system in a state of cryosleep. Tardigrades are so durable due to a special survival mechanism called cryptobiosis. Sounding like a crypto scam, F's in the chat for Hawkcoin, the tardigrade can expel almost the entirety of its body's water and replace it with a sugar-like substance that protects the cells from incurring damage in several ways. This is accomplished by first causing the cell to go dormant, so damaging waste does not build up as the metabolism basically ceases to operate, and this would also prevent the cells from dividing, which stops a tardigrade from aging in a non-conducive environment. Extrapolating that out to humanity, for instance, no cell division, no aging, meaning you can go long distances without your body getting older, which obviously on top of that, because of no cell metabolism, there's no thoughts, no consciousness, nothing. It just, you basically, for all intents and purposes, you die. So this means the trip would be instant for you, or at least your consciousness dies and then is restarted. Along with that, special proteins are released called DSUP, or DSUP, or damage suppressor proteins. And this is found to be quite unique in tardigrades specifically. This protects DNA in harsh conditions. For humans, this would be anything like direct radiation strikes to the genetic coding. It's the same for tardigrades as well. It is important to remember though, radiation is so lethal because it heats up the water in your cell, damaging your genetic coding. This is called indirect genetic damage, and that is much more prevalent and easier to have happen, which will injure you completely and could cause cancer because it essentially boils your genetic coding, which as you might guess is probably not great. Direct strikes from radiation are incredibly rare on the DNA of your body, so having this method at your disposal, you could increase your survivability in an environment that has higher radiation by taking away the heating of the water in your cells. And if you were able to take the tardigrade's abilities and transfer them to humanity, the benefits would be astronomical to our species. But how might that be accomplished, and where did it go wrong? Well, we'll discuss that momentarily. Meanwhile, Steven then heads down into the hole, and he's upset finding the cosmonaut has already been cut open. Pulling out his iPad because he's an iPad kid, he then leaves after taking some pictures and heads upstairs. Sadie, meanwhile, is looking at the tissue sample. Tardigrades run all throughout. From here, we can begin to understand what the Russians may have been going for. Understanding the resistance to the tardigrade abilities, perhaps the initial tests were to see if the tardigrades could maybe release a chemical that would alter the human cell as well. By saturating the human body with tardigrades, this may not have actually been the initial plan, but likely human tissue was introduced to the tardigrade in a separate environment. However, as we all know, if you've watched this channel for long enough, the only human tissue that can really live long-term outside of the body is one that is not fully healthy. The reality is, at our current technology level and the level the Russians would have found themselves in the 80s, this is going to be cancer cells. Cancer cells are interesting because they have broken away from Team Human and have almost returned sort of back to a single-celled sort of focus, which is fine if they want to be part of a multicellular organism, though they need to get out. But like a Reddit mod in his parents' basement, the issue is they hang around and remain quite parasitic. Outside of the body, since they have returned to a form of essentially being single-celled or almost colony-driven, they can exist independently without hormonal signaling of the rest of the body. And this is what I believe took place and caused what we were about to see. When the tardigrade was introduced to these cancerous cells, it appears there may have been some sort of crossover event concerning genetic material, which is what the Russians probably would have wanted. If we could maybe glean the D-sub gene from the tardigrades and then add that to the human genome, that would make our own genetic structure more stable. Along with that, if we could figure out where the tardigrade gets its ability to release the water from its body and replace it with sugar, and replicate that process in our own bodies, then the stars are officially ours at that point. But it appears this process may have had unintended consequences. When the tardigrades existed within the cancer, genetic material may have been exchanged, which then allowed them to be altered as well as, allowing them the chance to live within the human body, or at least those cells. Whether it was a predator event or just somewhere nice to call home is unknown, but it appears through doing this, the space in between the human cells became desirable, and as a result, anyone exposed to the tardigrade directly will become home to these creatures. It seems they still have the ability to share genes or at minimum influence cellular activity, but the question is also how? Well, as usual, I'm gonna blue ball you and we'll discuss that soon enough. Meanwhile, Big G and Knifey continue drinking as we see something is moving through the hallway before entering the room. While that's going on, Big G and officially Onatop are getting into a old-fashioned right proper domestic. Touching the scar on the side of her face, she then nopes out of there. Does that mean he technically won the fight? I think so. Another guy, sleeping, then wakes up hearing a noise in the room. At least somewhat, he's wearing earplugs. Turning over and cutting on his flashlight, he starts looking around as under the bed, he spots something. What in the name of all that is holy is that? Tendrils then come out and pull him out of his bed to his fate. So here's an example of why I believe this had to happen to create this thing. First, again, human cancer cells allow them to exist outside the body. The plan was to get the tardigrade genome integrated, not the human cancer cells integrated into the tardigrades, for at least proof of concept. Why this was done in space was probably to see how they would fare when exposed to cosmic rays. Upon doing so, there had to be an intermediate technology, possibly something known as zinc finger nucleases, or ZFNs, which allowed for a targeted site-specific modification at a certain point in the genetic coding, and this was actually being utilized already in the 1980s. By doing this, specific points of the genome could be excised and then added into another genome. While this approach was obviously not as refined as it is today, it was still quite viable concerning gene editing. So this was likely done on a macro scale at this point and required a solution of the material to exist housing both the tardigrades and human cancer cells. And this resulted in a blending of the two, making the tardigrades into a more cancerous-like human cell, and possibly even human cells more tardigrade, making them more durable. And as a result of this, this created what appears to be a cancerous mass that will have lobopodian structures appear later, which we are going to see. So Sadie now reports to the captain about how the sample is rotting. Onatop looks at the scar on her face as Roanoke is like, "Oh, I think he likes you. You mean Big G? Seems like a Chad to me. I'd say go for it." Back in the captain's nest, Steven then says they have all been exposed to a biological hazard by opening that suit, and he's going to bring up a lawsuit unless she signs a release giving him full control of the find. Back down, Onatop and Roanoke use some makeup on Onatop as she tells her she got her scar from a bad breakup. They found the guy. Well, most of them. Back down in the hole, the captain then notices the cosmonaut is gone. Steven then starts to lose it as the captain grabs him and almost breaks his arm. "Yeah, Steven, you might need to calm down there, brother. You're making the rest of us look like a bunch of egomaniacal nerds." He then starts coughing as everyone heads up the stairs, and he gets everyone up and collected. He tells everyone that the body that they found in the wreckage is officially gone, so it's wandering around the ship somewhere, or maybe somebody ate it or threw it overboard, who knows. So the finger pointing has officially started. Sadie then heads outside onto the deck as she asks what Steven is doing. He says he can't breathe as his skin starts exhibiting the same discoloration the cosmonaut had. Heading back in to alert the captain, they then hear him yelling, and as they go out there, his skin has become quite splotchy. He starts yelling, "Help me," as he appears to be having some massive allergic reaction. Carrying him in, they then bring him to the med bay as his skin temperature is extremely high. The skin's appearance then begins changing as tendrils quickly form out of the back and spray Doc directly in the mouth. His blood then runs down into the drain collectively. That can't be good. And this is the best example I can point to that shows that this isn't just a human cancer cell at this point. The tardigrades themselves, being single-celled, have clearly had some human DNA spliced into them through ZFNs, and as a result, this may have caused them to begin behaving as a multicellular organism on a macro scale, or at minimum, they appear to be like a colony. While fending for themselves like greedy little losers, cancer cells do exhibit colony behavior instead of true multicellularism, as we will see, and the things that are spawned out of this union appear to me to be colonies. So the allergic reaction also shows what's happening, and it's incredibly interesting because it kind of helps support the concept of cancer cells being utilized. When your body doesn't recognize something, it is labeled as non-self. On each cell, you actually have a self-denoting receptor so that your body can keep track of what is what, so to speak. When infected, the tardigrades will spread and have incorrect human markers. It's not so much an infection response, so to speak, as is an allergic response because your immune system reads it as foreign. The tardigrades enter the skin and then rapidly reproduce through a process known as parthenogenesis. And tardigrades are also known to do this anyhow, but it should be known they can reproduce sexually as well, but sometimes they just do it asexually if they're feeling frisky with themselves. Which, don't lie, you probably also have done that asexually as well. Anyways. So as they spread, the body becomes more aware of this and induces an allergic response as denoted when Steven says he cannot breathe. He's likely going into full anaphylactic shock at this point. The itching has also got to go hard. Likely a cytokine storm is induced shortly after, which would result in the end of the person, but prior, structures can be built at the behest of the tardigrade, influenced by the cancer cells. Now, why would the tardigrade go for the brain? Likely, it isn't, if I'm being completely honest. To me, what's much more likely is it's just going to continue building up in the body without really worrying about the brain, but invariably as more and more are found with the incorrect self-markers, an allergic reaction would become critical quite quickly, with symptoms presenting rapidly once the immunological cascade begins. So the bit of flesh that was still there is then captured by Sadie as it's absolutely losing it in the glass, spraying liquid nitrogen on it and then freezes it as Big G says this must have come from the spaceman. The captain says Sadie is going to tell them what they need to know, as then they ask her how it happened and really what went down with Steven, but Sadie has no idea. Luckily, I've got crackhead theories, but as always, we will get there. She suggests maybe it was a parasite that liquefied the host's body. Sadie says she knows it went from the cosmonaut to Steven, so it is infectious. She says they have all been exposed. Onatop then says some of them have been exposed more than others. Doc says he's clean, which, my man, you do not know that. The captain then says they are going to head for Dutch Harbor, weather be damned. Sadie says they need to run some tests as the captain continues kind of stating that they need to use the liquid nitrogen as a weapon if it comes down to it, with Atka going to get the engine started as they begin their tests. Getting the samples, they begin moving at around roughly about negative 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Sadie then suggests maybe the first thing they need to do is kill the brain, as maybe they see it as a threat, which again, I don't believe that. The device then begins beeping, indicating whatever they are doing is done, as Atka then heads down into the darkest engine room imaginable along with the captain. Looking around the engine room, they then find the steel has been bent on the drive shaft. The test they've run actually returned a higher level of genetic diversity. The creatures have absorbed the host DNA and evidently have the ability to reprogram DNA as well, which would indicate that there was some form of genetic tampering using ZFNs, given the technology at the time. So they can be pretty much anything that they want. Finding the cosmonaut in the engine room, well, that's horrifying. Arms then appear behind it, holding him up as the creature has formed. Brother, what is that? So now would be a very good time to leave, as Atka gets grabbed, trying to use liquid nitrogen on it, as the captain then grabs him but loses grip. Back up in the pod room, everyone starts distrusting one another. Pretty standard. Big G then heads out with a bucket of what I assume to be liquid nitrogen, with the scientist and captain coming around the corner holding Atka's necklace. He says they're going to need a bigger bucket, which, hold up, isn't this the actor, the main actor from Jaws, I think? My God, the callbacks. The captain then says the thing was strong enough to bend a drive shaft, so they are stuck there now. Sadie says it can take the shape of anything it wants, as the captain says they need to ice it before it figures out the bulkheads in there are not watertight. Bro, stop saying that stuff in front of Doc. So the power then starts shutting off as emergency power comes on. They upgrade their bucket system with liquid nitrogen to make it more aggressive as side male protagonist, who's definitely not infected in any way at this point, takes lead. As they move to where the creature was, it's gone, but there's a lot of blood from Atka. They then find him currently being eaten as they splash it in an attempt to freeze it. Hearing the ice crack, the creature is frozen, giving them a chance to look at it, but more importantly, giving me a chance to look at it. Yep. Looks like a giant cancer blob to me. So the scientist outside starts yelling about how she needs to help. He's gone crazy. Onatop has locked up Doc, saying he's infected. Well, she would know, wouldn't she? She then goes to take him out as they grab her to prevent her from firing, as tendrils then emerge out of his back. She fires a flare at him, and he is losing it in that chain link fence cage as he begins burning. Watching him burn, they then all head back inside the ship as Onatop says, "Freeze melts, fires forever." Insert the clip of the dog with the daredevil mask here with that statement. So it seems tardigrades can survive boiling water, seeing as their ancestors came from the ocean, which had hydrothermal vents, which is basically just boiling water. But fire, man's answer, is stronger than boiling water. Humanity number one. So Sadie begins looking through Onatop's stuff as she asks her what she's really here for. Probably the pod, if I had to guess. I mean, she's on a ship and she's Russian, and you know, the Russians are always villains in American movies and European movies, and strangely enough, even Russian movies. Come to think of it, what are you guys doing over there? So as they look through the rest of her stuff, the captain says it's military communication gear. What is she doing with it? She then spills the spaghetti out of her pocket over this. She says she's here for the lander. She's a Russian consultant, as she says, not a Russian spy, because that makes it sound too cool. The Soviets tried to create a cosmonaut resistant to radiation to give them sort of an edge in the space race. Clearly it went poorly, though I get the concept they were going for. Seems like a critical issue with the integration into the human body, but it does make sense. Seriously, whoever did make this movie really had a cool idea, but it's not just that, like, I mean, it's something we could honestly be able to utilize in real life, and it could be highly beneficial to our species with spaceflight. But she was sent to observe the effects and then report back. The other scientists then start asking about how the Russians are coming to pick it up, right? As then Knifey says, they all agree, this thing should never reach the shore. She then pulls out a handheld on Big G, and in 30 minutes, the submarine that has been tracking her will pick her up, and then in another 30 minutes, the ship will detonate. Just when you think you can trust a Russian operative. Sadie then apologizes to the grandfather, but he was curious as she was, so he's like, I wanted to bring it up on the boat too. So then she asks what Grandma is going to do if he's gone, as evidently Grandma died 3 months ago and they just never told Sadie. Brother, what? Pancreatic cancer took her. That's pretty depressing. So he apologizes to her as Xena Onatop just sits over there sort of chilling. Meanwhile, the pipes start oozing. Onatop has been inoculated against the infection, so she's not worried about it, which you might be thinking, well, science boy, we were waiting. How is that possible? Well, strap in, because it's actually pretty easy as of according to about, I think, a month ago. See, the thing about the human immune system is it is crazy strong. It can take you out quite easily with literally no effort. In fact, if primed, it can easily take out cancer. Every day your body destroys at least one cell that would have become a tumor. Interestingly enough, and you guys are gonna, I don't know, some people might hate this, some people might not. It just depends on what your view of history is. Moderna actually may have a vaccine for cancer. They were using it to test out its ability to treat melanoma, which was highly successful. That then they turned on 3 people who had throat and neck cancers. 2 went into complete remission, and the other had their cancer stop growing. How it works is by making the immune system aware of certain markers that the cancer cell would be presenting on its surface, which indicates it's a cancer. The immune system finding these allows them to bypass the cancer's ability to hide itself by presenting these self-markers. So instead of looking for, like, are you supposed to be here? The immune system is searching for, is there anything to indicate you're not supposed to be here? So instead of looking for a positive, it's looking for a negative. So even if the cancer cell has the markers, it's like, no, I'm human, I'm good. Well, the cancer cell also has other markers on it that it may be using to communicate with other cancer cells that indicate, no, I'm actually not good, I'm kind of a douche, whereas your normal cells would not have these. So this prevents cancer from continuing to hide like the little chode it is. The future of this medication, while yes, was in I Am Legend, Don't worry about that. And I mean, given the era we just went through with that also, look, I know you guys probably aren't super excited about new vaccines. Like, it's just, you can read the room sort of scenario. But remember, given the choice between dropping from cancer or taking a vaccine that could potentially rectify the issue, I'm going to be taking that vaccine 10 out of 10 times. What you do is up to you and is your own discretion, but hopefully nobody listening to this or myself will ever have to make that choice. I hope you guys are always healthy and will remain healthy well into old age. Anyhow, this same vaccine is probably what Onatop took. Well, not the same vaccine, but a similar method. The tardigrade experiments likely continued on Earth, and by utilizing these cellular markers on the tardigrades prior to the infection getting out of control, the immune system is able to destroy it, and it most definitely would be able to take out a tardigrade with a targeted attack. So the captain then squares up asking, well, what happens if we just rush you? Yes, good. Tell her what you're going to do so that she can get up and aim at you. You guys could have gotten to her inside of 4 steps. That's faster than she'd probably be able to react. Very good. So she starts backing up as a tendril then approaches her, and Ronell then gets grabbed and pulled into a pipe. Ooh, God, that is not a good way to go. That pipe is tight. Yeesh. So Big G straight up then punches Onatop as he grabs her and she can't escape. They demand to know where the charges are as then half a body appears down the hallway. That can't be good. Tendrils then emerge as it runs at her, attacking her. Side male protagonist then runs upstairs, finding that she's been taken through the vents and is likely exceedingly injured because that looks painful. Following her getting dragged, he says she's gone as they must now look for the charges. Side male protagonist then says they should stick together, but they don't have time, so they split up in teams of 2 to look for the charges. Beginning their search, they then find the first charge pretty easily, and they are magnetic. Side protag then says the bilge is below them, but only the pipes head down there. Removing the charge, Big G then starts finding meat on the ground, as then he tries to straighten out the drive shaft as Onatop gets totally infected and then revived. This is easily accomplished because apparently she was taken out, although really her meat was just used to kind of create a giant cancerous mass. Once that happens, the immune system would really no longer be active, so there's really nothing stopping the tardigrades at all from infecting her, because while the immune system is primed to deal with the tardigrades, they would be dead. The immune cells, that is. So Sadie now heads down into the bilge to search for the charges, and evidently it smells horrible, which I think is pretty standard. Checking the area out, she then spots the rest of the charges on one side of the boat. The plan was to detonate them and then roll the boat over, taking everyone out. Entering the water? No thanks. She then starts removing the charges one by one as side protag realizes that the crab locker is empty. That was 2 tons of crab that have been turned into goo, which is not ideal. Dropping the charges, she realizes that she's actually surrounded by the goo. She still needs to get the other 2 charges out of there, as then she drops one and realizes she's got to reach in there to get it. Luckily, she's able to use the crowbar to go and grab it because they're magnetic and it didn't attach itself to the floor for some reason, even though it's metal, as the goo realizes she's in there with it. Making her way towards the rope to get the crowbar on it, the tendrils then start going for her as they are able to pull her out. Attaching the last 2 charges, the goo then breaches the bottom of the boat and escapes the bilge. Leaving that room, she then puts the charges on the liquid nitrogen tanks as then they watch the creature emerge. Looking like a grave mind, it lets out a roar and then it branches out towards them as they are able to escape the room, but not before Big G is able to get the door shut on it. The captain then got sprayed in the face, basically indicating that he's been infected by this life form, as he tells the male side protagonist to keep him away from her as he's going to change. Hearing radio chatter, Sadie then tells them their consultant is dead, which was a really stupid idea because you have no idea what they are packing on that submarine. A freaking torpedo could be heading towards you right now, considering the mission is a failure and they don't want you to survive to tell anybody that they were screwing around out. Real smart. So the captain now heads back up to the nest as he looks out over the deck. He calls in a mayday as he pulls his wife's ashes out. This is pretty much his last chance to actually go and spread those. And with everyone coming outside, he starts to spread them in the ocean. As then he asks Sadie, how long do we have? As interestingly, she says they have 12 minutes, which I checked the movie IRL, they had 12 minutes left in the movie. He tells Big G to get the drive shaft straightened out as he instructs side male protagonist to keep the nitrogen pointed at him. As Big G sets in on the drive shaft, I mean, it's a pretty good idea, but unfortunately he's making a lot of noise, as in the creature hears him and oh no, Onatop is back! Pulling a knife on her, he begins his attack as he's able to somewhat hold her off, as in he stabs her a bunch of times. It then falls down and vacates the area. The captain is starting to have some issues controlling his body as Big G then gets the drive shaft straightened out, but they have 1 minute and 25 seconds. Then as he stands there triumphantly, no! He takes a pincer to the chest. I mean, Bro, you could have gotten out of there. But he's able to kind of get it wrapped up in the drive shaft, which then breaks it in like 100 ways, and then he dies. So the main part of this creature then gets detonated and frozen by liquid nitrogen tanks going off as the side male protagonist tells Sadie they have to pilot her out of there. The captain then tells her not to let her fear hold her down, which he keeps saying that, but it's never explained what it's even for. So his skin begins to change as the captain tells the side protag to ice him now, as then his brain starts getting totally attacked, allegedly. Sadie then looks over pictures in the captain's nest as she begins boating them out of there. Before side protag has a chance to ice anyone, he takes a tendril through the sternum and then gets pulled away, leaving the captain with very little time to do it himself. Sadie then watches side protag get pulled out onto the deck area as the captain then starts getting attacked while he liquid nitrogens the tentacles. Looking out, she decides to listen to his advice and then ice the whole ship. Full steam ahead, she moves towards a giant iceberg as the creature begins banging on the door, about to completely break through. She climbs out the window, jumping down, but not before grabbing a radio. As the creature emerges, it do be a mass of tentacles. Heading to the iceberg, she then jumps onto some ice below as she watches the boat crash just gently into the iceberg, quite literally icing it. The radio transmissions start coming through as Dutch Harbor is calling out to her. She tells them the nature of her emergency and that all souls are lost, except one. She then does the unthinkable and says the title of the movie, Harbinger down. The ship has been contained, and with it the creature. The chopper is apparently in the vicinity, and she just kind of lays there rather than answering for some reason. I have no idea what was up with her jumping on the ice kill herself. I don't know. But anyways, the helicopter's approaching anyways, and evidently she's saved. Allegedly. That's what scholars maintain. Anyway, thus concludes Harbinger down. But anyhow, let me present you guys with a question. Do you think the genetic information was transmitted to the tardigrade, or was the tardigrade information transmitted to the cancer? I believe it to be the tardigrade since they were in the actual skin of a person. But with that, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, leave me a like would be great of you as it helps the video, and subscribing is baller as in 2025, I'm trying to get to 1.25 million subs. It's a goal. It's a difficult goal, but I'm trying to do it. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and games links in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronauts, Army the Better One, and Tristan Kessick. Thank you guys for the awesome support. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And to my scientists, Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, Official Texan, and Vivix Hellstrom, I do appreciate you guys also. And to the rest of my patron, you guys are ballers. It keeps everything running smoothly. That's also appreciated. Everybody who's associated with the Patreon in general, thank you. So all right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.